For today, I'm only going to talk about the majorly delusional. I'm not talking about the worrisome Christians of the complete bat insane Christians. I'm going to talk about just ordinary majorly delusional Christians. The belief that some cosmic Jewish zombie can make you live forever if you symbolically eat his flesh and telepathically tell him that you accept him as your master so he can remove an evil force from your soul that is present in humanity because a rib woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree.
He's saying that your Christian faith is delusional. But if you'll stay through this video, I think you're going to find out that he can't demonstrate it even on his own terms. Richard Carrier has debated some of the greats among Christian apologists, and lately he's been showing up all over my feed on YouTube. Today we're going to look at a conference speech that he gave and see if he's right that we're all just experiencing a delusion. Let's go into the green room and get started.
For a false belief to be a delusion, it has to meet these three criteria, all three. The first is certainty. It has to be held with absolute conviction. If you're kind of wishy-washy about it, it doesn't really qualify. It also has to have incorrigibility. That means it's not changeable by compelling counter-argument or proof to the contrary. And that's one of the key features of delusion. And the third criterion is impossibility or falsity of content. In other words, it has to be implausible, bizarre, or patently untrue.
Okay, now let's pause right here, because as we're considering whether Christianity is a delusion, he says, now you may want to run the video back and listen to what he said again so you hear him saying it, that in order for something to qualify as delusion, it has to meet all three, not one, not two, all three of these criteria, okay? So I maintain that for most of the types of Christians that are probably going to read Richard Carrier's material or watch a video like this, they don't fall into any of these. But anyway, you can't just have one or two. It has to be all three. He's pretty clear about that. So the question we're going to have to answer here as the video rolls on is: does Christianity is Christianity properly held something that is held with absolute conviction? Now, he's already ditched colloquial definitions here. So when he says certainty, we're taking him to mean absolute certainty. I mean, it says there, absolute conviction of this. So this is like Cartesian certainty, like you're as certain of this as you are of your own existence or something, you know. Incorrigibility, not changeable by compelling counter argument or proof to the contrary. So so far we've got a person that he thinks is you're Christian, that has Cartesian certainty about God, and some claim to, that nothing would convince them otherwise, even absolute proof would not convince them otherwise. And then lastly, it's the belief that's being held is impossible or false. And the way you know that is it's implausible, more likely not to be true than to be true. Bizarre, well, there's a lot of things that are actually true that strike us as very bizarre. I mean, have you ever heard these atheists drone on about quantum mechanics and the weird stuff that goes on there? Get them to start talking about how they think it's possible that we could have a past infinite universe, or that the universe came to exist from absolutely nothing, as some people hold. You get them talking about this stuff, you get some really bizarre stuff. So I guess we should ditch that and consider it delusional. Well, of course not. There's a lot of bizarre things that actually are true, not that those things are true. And then patently untrue, well, that's the very thing we're trying to get to the bottom of with Christianity. So here we have it. And by the way, implausible and bizarre don't get you to impossibility, right? I agree that we should believe things that are plausibly true, more likely to be true than false. But that doesn't mean there are things that are from our perspective epistemologically less likely to be true than false from our perspective, but that doesn't mean they're impossible. And sometimes those things turn out to be true, right? So anyway, I think I said that right. So you've got this criteria here. He says it has to fit all three of them. And so we're going to move forward and see whether Christianity passes the test or whether it's delusional.
Now, there are different kinds of delusion.
Now, I've got the screen cut off just below number 4. Number 5 is a colloquial term that's popular now, which is, I'll just say it this way, and forgive me if you think this is uncouth, but bat crap insane. He uses the expletive there. So so he's got ranging 1 to 5 to, we could just say, mildly delusional, majorly delusional, worrisome, crazy, and insane. Let's keep going.
Delusion comes in many degrees. Here you got my official Dr. Carrier delusion scale. You go from mildly delusional. Now, we all are mildly delusional. Actually, psychology has proven that we all harbor a variety of different kinds of mild delusions. Guys often think they're hotter than they are. Women often think they're less hot than they actually are.
Okay, now stop right there. We are at minute 6:49. I'm going to try to remember that so we can get back to it easily. But let's go back to his three criteria, and let's take a look. Now, he just said people are, now he's trying to show that there's some things that are mildly delusional and some things that are majorly delusional. Now, he's just said people thinking that they're hot or not hot. They could be delusional in either case. Okay, well, if someone thinks that they're not hot, like if someone doesn't think they're physically attractive, or at least not very physically attractive, do they hold that with absolute certainty? Well, some do, some don't. People that think that they are absolutely beautiful, you know, are they holding that with absolute certainty? Well, some do, some don't. But most of those people have serious doubts about it at some point or other, because we're constantly thinking about ourselves, whether we like to admit it or not, and we're thinking about how other people view us, and things that people say about our physical attractiveness can be very helpful or harmful to our day. And so do most people hold that with absolute certainty? I don't think so. Incorrigible, not changeable by compelling counter argument or proof to the contrary. Maybe that's the case, but I don't know about that. Now, what about the impossibility or falsity of content? Well, the problem there is that people's attractiveness level is a subjective issue. It's not objective. We could get into issues of objectivity of beauty and all those sorts of things. But leaving that off the table for a moment, let's just say that that's subjective. That's a matter of opinion. So it doesn't even qualify for the third one. And remember, he has to have all three in order for something to be delusional. Now, you might say, well, maybe that's why he says it's mildly delusional. No, he can't mean that, because he said for it to be delusional at all, it has to hit all three of these. So what he must mean by mildly delusional, if he's being consistent, is that it does hit all three, but it's just a more of a trivial issue. It doesn't affect the world in any major way. So someone's beliefs about religion are huge worldview issues, whereas someone's opinion about how they look physically, that's not really like, gonna be the end of the world, right? So it's a mild delusion. It's kind of trivial. It's not that significant. But that would mean that even if something is going to be mildly delusional, it still has to fit all three of these. And it doesn't. It can't even. It's category error, I think, to even say that that the third category is even appropriate to the discussion. So already we're not making it very far in, and already it's not a big deal. I'm just trying to show you that he's come up with something here that he thinks is going to allow us to make determinations about whether Christian people are delusional, and even the examples that he's given don't match his own criteria. So with that, let's keep going.
Actually are. And they can actually show this with objective tests. They can have like everybody in the room look at your picture and rate how attractive you are, and then have you rate how attractive you are, and you can see the difference between the average objective measure and your measure. These are the kinds of...
It's an objective measure of what other people, a number of other people think. It doesn't mean that it's actually objectively true. Remember, subjective and objective things. Objective things are matters that we might think of as matters of fact, like 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 7 is objectively wrong. Even if everyone else in the room thought that 2 + 2 = 7 was true, they just all be wrong. So objective facts don't matter. It doesn't matter what opinions of people are, no matter the size of the sample. Subjective things are matters of opinion. So whether a particular person is beautiful, that person is beautiful. Well, it may be my opinion. It may not be the opinion of another person. As I've said many times before, are bald-headed, bearded men the most attractive kinds of men? As much as I wish that were objectively true, that they are, I'm glad my wife thinks so, it's still subjective. So you can't save it, Carrier.
Mild delusions you have. One of the common ones is people overestimate how competent they are at a skill. And ironically, the less competent you are, the more you overestimate your competence at the skill. And this is a universal thing. It's the way our brains work. And anyway, so there are mild delusions. Then there are majorly...
Now again, what he must mean by mild delusions is that they hit all three of the criteria, but they're just not that significant, whereas major delusions hit all three, and they're... but they are significant. That's the only way to make sense of that, because he did say something has to hit all three to be delusional at all. He didn't say to be majorly delusional, but to be delusional.
Delusional people. There's people that get worrisome, and then crazy, and then, of course, get insane. Now, for today, I'm only going to talk about the majorly delusional. I'm not talking about the worrisome Christians or the complete insane Christians. I'm going to talk about just ordinary majorly delusional Christians. I'm also not going to be talking about mildly delusional Christians. Now,
You do realize, and we'll get more into this later, that this is so affirming to the crowd. You know, you've got a crowd of skeptics here. This is Skepticon, some kind of conference, and it's so condescending the way they're speaking about religion. But I'm not going to talk about the really delusional, the bat crap crazy people. I'm not talking about the mildly delusional. I'm talking about your average run-of-the-mill, majorly delusional Christian. I mean, come on. Do you really think this is the way to win over Christians? I'll tell you, again, like I said, we'll get into this later, but it's really just an affirming to the crowd. It's kind of to the amen section of Skepticon. Listen, I'm a really smart guy up here telling you that those people are crazy, and you knew they were crazy, and now you got a really smart guy telling you that what you already knew was crazy, right? This is not the sort of a video that's really going to make that much of an impression on actual Christians, okay? And if it does, it shouldn't.
So what are we talking about Christianity? Let's define Christianity here. Now, I can't take credit for this. I did not invent this quote. I don't know who the author is, so props to them, whoever they are. Maybe someone can find out and blog it or something. But it's...
Okay, so let's read it. He's going to read the belief that some cosmic Jewish zombie can make you live forever if you symbolically eat his flesh and telepathically tell him that you accept him as your master. So he can remove an evil force from your soul that is present in humanity because a rib woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree. Okay, so you notice one of the things that I try to point out in these videos, and I haven't done it in a few videos, but one of the biggest, I think the biggest argument, you know, I'm doing a demon work right now, and one of the thing that I'm doing research on, actual research, going out and doing surveys with large numbers of Christians in different parts of the country, and trying to see if we can increase their knowledge of and confidence level using Christian apologetics with other Christians who are experiencing worldview doubt, because that happens. It happens on both sides, by the way. Atheists experience doubt about their atheism. You should see the emails that I get, and Christians occasionally experience doubt. Worldview doubt is just a part of being human, and it's because there's so much on the line either way. So anyway, the thing is, in doing that research, I was putting together a PowerPoint presentation for a seminar that I was going to run, and I was listing out atheist arguments that atheism is true, that a particular person in the church might have encountered. And so I had up there, you know, arguments from evil, various kind, logical, evidential. Then I had like divine hiddenness arguments and things like this, incoherence arguments, omnipotence paradox, omniscience paradox, all these kind of things that atheists bring. And then it occurred to me, whoa. Is this the most powerful that they have? Well, it may be the most intellectually potent, say the evidential argument from evil, in my opinion. Is probably the most intellectually potent argument that they have. We still have answers for it. But as I thought about that, I thought, you know, I don't actually think so. I think in terms of persuasion, in terms of actually evangelizing for atheism, in terms of reaching everyday people who go on YouTube and look at a video like this and reaching them, it's mockery. It's not even an argument. It's mockery. Mockery is the most potent thing. When I talk to people who are experiencing doubt, who are listening to YouTube atheists and then listening to Christian apologists, they're always happy to say the Christian apologists give all these arguments and evidence and reasons, but it's just the fact that they say this with such confidence and such boldness, and they make it sound, you know, ridiculous or whatever. Yes, that's mockery. And it plays on the fact that none of us wants to feel stupid. None of us wants to feel like we were sold a bill of goods. And especially in Western culture, most of what makes it in the entertainment world and those sorts of things are more objectively based in science and natural sciences and stuff like that. And so when you start talking about what most of the history of the world understood was true, which is that there are non-material things and that there is a God or gods out there, that there are supernatural forces at work, that sounds a little bit silly, but it only sounds silly in the context that you have been fed for many, many years now living in the West. And you don't want to feel stupid. And so as a result, they are, people like this are able to play on that with mockery. And so that's a big motivator. But here's the thing. Mockery can go either way. So I could happily say back to Richard Carrier something like, and if not every one of these things hits you as an atheist, there are atheists that hold all these things. I could say something like, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to believe in some sort of a naturalistic atheistic worldview. Yeah, nothing plus nothing caused everything in some massive cosmic explosion, and somehow magically you had first life that nobody understands. By the way, nobody's ever seen that happen. And it was molecules to man evolution. And, you know, I once was a tadpole with tail on the end, and then I was a frog in keeping with trend. I then was a monkey swinging from a tree, and now I'm a college professor with a PhD. And I mean, you can make everything sound absolutely absurd. You know, someone who is a young earth creationist who uses language like that all the time is someone like Kent Hovind. He uses that sort of language all the time. I don't share a lot of those views that Kent Hovind shares, and I certainly wouldn't approach it that way. Why? Because it's offensive to the people that you should be trying to reach, number one. But secondly, I want to point out that it goes either way. It goes either way. And you say, you know what you would say to me back? You'd say, well, you know, that you just gave a caricature of it. There's actually a whole lot more to say about that. It doesn't sound as silly as you just made it sound. Granted, I agree. And you know what? When you look at something like this statement in front of us here, it's not like it sounds. It's just, this is just, what do we call it? This is just mockery. So let's go through it. The belief that some cosmic Jewish zombie. Now, throwing in the term Jewish, which is an ethnicity that we are very much familiar with, and so some of us know Jewish people, so it sounds a little bit silly to us because we know people. Some Jewish zombie, and then zombie. The use of the term zombie. A zombie is the Walking Dead, but is that what Christianity teaches about Jesus? No, Jesus is a risen, glorified body, very much alive. And if that sounds strange to you, what about these atheists that believe that the universe came into existence from absolutely nothing, or that the universe is past infinite? But just go with the universe came into existence from nothing. Is that less crazy in a complicated way? No, that's more crazy in a complicated way. In fact, I would say Jesus being risen from the dead is not crazy, because if you have a God who can create the universe, then you have a God who raising Jesus from the dead is small potatoes for him. So you've got the presupposition of naturalism, the use of the term Jewish, and the use of the term zombie that are all working together to make this sound silly. Can make you live forever. Yes. Did you know there are naturalistic atheists who are right now working on ways to make people live forever? Go research it. If you symbolically eat his flesh and okay, first of all, this is an issue of obedience. It's not about, besides, there are various brands of Christianity, this idea that there's a works-based salvation, that you have to keep taking of these elements in order to sustain your salvation, isn't even what at least a lot of the Christians that Richard Carrier is trying to impact even believe. And telepathically tell him that you accept him as your master. Okay, now there he's talking about prayer. Okay, the fact is the vast majority, I'm not saying that prayer is true because of this, but if we're talking about something sounding crazy, the vast majority of the history of the world believes in prayer. It's only like 2% atheists in the world, and most of those are alive today, who have believed that prayer is some kind of a ridiculous thing. Again, if there's a God who created the universe from nothing, he probably doesn't have trouble hearing your prayers, okay? You tell him that you accept him as your master. Okay, good. So he can remove an evil force from your soul that is present in humanity. Okay, he can forgive your sins because we're all sinners. And that shouldn't really be all that controversial, whether you want to call it or being sinful or not. Most people today, atheists or otherwise, recognize that people do crummy things, right? People are broken. We call that sin in Christianity. And yes, we think that this Jesus that God raised from the dead is able to forgive us of that, right? Okay, sorry you don't like that, but there's nothing about it that's that silly. And he's present in humanity because a rib woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree. Okay, so because the first woman, and there's stuff we could talk about with this rib and just really the word side there, that was convinced by a talking snake, yes, and we're not talking about Disney here. We believe in supernatural forces at work, and could a supernatural force communicate? It doesn't mean that he has to move the vocal cords of the snake to eat from a magical tree. There, the use of the term magical to play on your past history understanding with that from card tricks and illusionists and people like that magic isn't really real. But supernatural, yeah, there's nothing wrong with supernatural. Some Christians object to the use of the term supernatural, but I use it to parallel or to give the other side of the fact that the universe coming into existence from a state of timeless nothingness, whatever caused it not being in space, in time, or made of matter, would not be natural, because those are the things we mean when we say natural. So whatever you think, if you think that the whole cosmos had a beginning, then you already have to think that something that is not the stuff of nature did that. I call that supernatural. So the idea that supernatural stuff is going on is an okay explanation. Yeah, I think so. And as a reasonably well-educated person, I think I've got good reason for that. So you see here, you can deconstruct what's been said. Now, you still may think, okay, so the idea that God came in the flesh to pay for the sins of the world, because as a just God, as a good God, he would have to be a just God, otherwise he's not a good God. So there has to be a penalty paid. But he loved us enough that God came in the flesh and paid the price for us out of his great love, and that all this happened because God created the world that we live in. That's not that strange. If you don't like that, well, then you just don't like that. That's fine. If you don't find it persuasive, then you don't find it persuasive. But when you put it in terms like this, it's to create the least charitable reading of what's actually happening. And the reason you would do something like that is, again, to affirm to the audience what they already hold. This was at an atheist conference, as I say. And any Christian who hears this is going to say, wait a minute, you have really not expressed this the way that most of us would express it. Now, one might say, well, yeah, but the point of doing that is to illustrate to the Christian that if you strip away all the religiously informed terminology and just call it like it is, it sounds crazy. Yeah, but the religiously informed language, the theological language, the academic language that we use on these things are there for a reason, because they communicate larger concepts that you weren't able to fit into a little pithy paragraph like this, okay? So this is just mockery, and it's the best that atheists can do. And frankly, I'm glad it's the best that they can do.
And there really isn't a single proposition in there that your average Christian can honestly deny. Yeah.
No, there are things there that sound somewhat in a weird way like the Christian story, like a bad parody of the Christian story. But just going off of the inaccurate use of the term zombie, when that's a walking dead person, when we're talking about a person who is alive, in fact, in a way that we are not even alive right now, that is a very different concept. So yeah, I can deny your propositions.
Yeah, that's what we believe. What can I say? Now, though, there are a lot of Christians now who've really taken a lot of flack for that, so we've come out with a new improved Christianity of the maybe last 50 years or so, where they admit, okay, all that Eve stuff is baloney, the rib woman, talking snake, okay, maybe that's all myth. But I still have an imaginary friend who magically manipulates the world for me, and he
Notice again the use of the term magic, again playing on your history of understanding the term magic to be what illusionists or magicians who use trickery do, and the real concept of like Disney magic doesn't really exist.
also magically impregnated a woman 2,000 years ago, and she bore him a son who underwent an ancient ritual of blood sacrifice in order to dispel a curse laid upon me, thus ensuring I will be immortal, although I've never seen this work for anyone else before. So that's...
And now, what do you mean? The only thing in there that we would have direct access to demonstrate to others would be something like answered prayer. And I've had many, many, many prayers answered. I may have shared this in a previous episode, but in fact, this is the thing. When you've lived a lifetime of Christianity, which I haven't even yet, but for many, many years, and you've had chance to follow the biblical parameters for prayer and see if they work, I can fairly confidently tell you that when I have, not every time, but most of the time that I follow the biblical parameters for prayer, like not praying for selfish gain, praying in the name of Jesus, which means in accordance with things that he would want, praying according to the will of God, these sorts of things. When I've done that, my prayers have, overwhelmingly been answered. Not always, because I can't see what he sees. Maybe it's not in my best interest or the best interest of the kingdom for him to always answer all of my prayers. But overwhelmingly, I have them answered. And when you see that happen again and again and again and again and again and again, you just hear people say, well, prayer doesn't work. And you just think, man, If you only knew. I mean, you're speaking from a position of absolute ignorance on this, and I don't say that to be rude. I just say it to be clinical about it. I've experienced it. Give you a really good, obvious example. This is what I was saying I may have shared before, that when I was pastoring, and I was really trying to reach our community, and I would always pray. We had some really good Sunday school teachers, and they were doing a real good job in their class, great discussions. And I felt like people got as much out of that as they did out of the service, the main service on Sunday morning. And we had 2 services. We were really growing. God was really blessing. A lot of people coming to Christ. And I would go up to the office, which was in a house up above where the church was, and I would pray for God to, whatever He needed to do to prompt people, motivate people, convict people to come to Sunday school, because I really wanted to go to Sunday school. And I would stand up there and watch the parking lot and see who was filling in, down there at the church. And I would pray, and often I would pray for a number that was reasonable, but higher than it had been. And I would pray for a specific number. I'd say, Lord, I pray that we would have at least, 247 in Sunday school today, whatever. And it got that the prayer was answered so specifically so many times that normally when I would go down from that house where the offices were to the church before church started, the Sunday school director who had those numbers would have it written down on a piece of paper. This became our custom. And he would come and say, what number did you pray for? 247. And many times, I can't say every time, but many, many times, he would show me, and it was 247, exactly what I had prayed for. I got smarter because later on an older minister said, well, you're doing it wrong. Don't pray for a specific number. Say, instead of saying, Lord, please let us have 247, say, let us have at least 247 today. And so I started doing it that way. Why limit what your prayers, right? So the fact of the matter is, that may sound silly to you, and if it does, I can't help you. I just know that that's just a very simple example of the many prayers that I've seen answered in my life, and Christians can attest to that. If you haven't seen that happen yet, I would encourage you to do a study of prayer and see what does the Bible say about prayer. What are the biblical parameters for prayer? And then start praying according to those. Also making sure that you're right with God when you pray those prayers, and just watch what happens and give it a period of time and just notice. Because I think that you'll see that there's power in prayer, and I think that's true. So let's see. So that's in this list. That's the thing that you could actually, and what do you mean? Although I've never seen this work for anyone else before. I've seen it work for me, and I've certainly seen it work for others. So this is just false.
That's what we're dealing with. That's Christianity. That's the belief that we're going to test. Is that a delusion? Now, there are varieties of Christians as well. There's nominal apathetic.
Now, the answer, he said, is it a delusion? Well, in a minute, we're going to go back to those 3 criteria he laid out and see whether it's a delusion. Not the caricature that he presents, but the actual state of affairs as you have a Christian sitting before you right now who can tell you. And we're going to look also at the types of Christians he thinks are moderately delusional and majorly delusional, and see.
Christians who just say they're Christian but don't really believe any of it, or don't even care whether it's true or not. I'm not talking about those Christians today. There's also Christians who don't really know if it's true. It's a sort of a metaphor or something. They have different kinds of ideas. Very liberal Christians that you can often have a really hard time trying to pin them down on what actually they believe. I'm not talking.
Now, I agree with him. I want to talk to the people that believe in what we would call a theologically conservative Christianity. However, let me just say that when it says things like "it's true as told," we need to be clear whether we're talking about there "it's true as told." Does he mean a literal reading of everything in the Bible? Because we really have to be careful with genre and what sort of genre is this. We're going to see more of this later. But are we talking about poetry? Are we talking about narrative? Are we talking about apocalyptic language? Are we talking about biography? What sort of things are we talking about? Because it may be true. It may be true. Like if the Bible says, something like the 4 corners of the earth, or the sun rises, or something like that. We use that language now. We'd say the sun rises. We say, the sun didn't actually rise, but we understand that we mean from our perspective, it looks as though it's rising. So we say the sun rises and sets, rises and falls. You wouldn't say, oh, well, you're wrong. You're factually wrong because the sun doesn't rise. No. You know what you mean. It's a figure of speech. Well, even more so with poetry. So if you're going to say something like "it's true as told," what are you? Because I run into atheists all the time who try to say that the Bible gets some thing wrong when it's not speaking scientifically, it's speaking poetically or something in the Psalms. And so I'm not comfortable with that, but I do agree with I sympathize with the sentiment. There we go. That we want to talk about what about real Christians who are actually believing the Christian message, not people who are just nominal or saying the whole thing is a metaphor. Okay.
I'm not talking about those Christians either. I'm talking about the Christians that it's true as told Christians, and the same ones who say it's all true, and Jesus is coming from outer space to kill you soon. That's actual.
Again, notice the mockery and the phrasing of things in the least charitable way to your position. Again, we could do that right back with evolution. We could do that right back with the multiverse. We could do that right back with the coming into the beginning of the universe from nothing, by nothing, for nothing. We could do it with the past infinite universe. We could do it with Richard Carrier's hair. We could do it with anything you want. All right. So you want to phrase things in charitable ways and then try to shoot that down. Not phrase them in the least imaginably charitable way and then shoot that down.
Polled results, 40% of the American public believes that, by the way. So we could talk about maybe about 60% of Christians are it's true as told, but aren't so sure about when Jesus is going to come and kill us. But, And there's also a split between what I call the mildly delusional and the majorly delusional Christians. And the mildly delusional ones have personal belief in God, like God exists, and Jesus was a great guy. But they have room to move. They'll waffle a little bit on the divine issues of Jesus and so forth.
Okay, so now I want you to notice we're at minute mark 10:18, so I'm going to try to remember 10:18. And we're going to go back to his three, let's see, where are they? The three things he's got here. So the idea that Jesus is the Son of God and whatnot is supposed to be majorly delusional. Minorly delusional or moderately delusional, whatever, is theism is true, but Jesus was just a nice guy. Okay. Now, are either one of those things delusional? I think the first one is false, that Jesus was just a nice guy, if that's what he means. But are either of these positions delusional using Carrier's own definitions or criteria for what counts as delusional? Now, this is, I think, the golden nugget of this whole thing so far. And that is, okay, so the kind of Christians who would listen to Richard Carrier or watch a video like this one, like you who are watching, who are Christians, are overwhelmingly not going to hit all three of these. So what about certainty? Some Christians will hold to a Cartesian certainty about this. And I've even had little arguments with other Christians about Cartesian certainty. I think Cartesian certainty is useless. Cartesian certainty is the belief that is the level of certainty that you're as certain, like, Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am. He thought that's the one thing he could have absolute certainty about. Some people even think that's wrong because that requires you to trust your reason. And how do you know that you're reasoning properly, right? So some people say you can't be absolutely certain about anything. But let's just go with Descartes, because most people call this level of certainty Cartesian certainty. That I think, therefore I am. I can at least be absolutely certain of that. Some people would, so you can be certain of your own existence, but you can't be certain about whether the room around you exists, that you're not in the Matrix, that Richard Carrier is a real person, all those kind of things. We can't have absolute certainty about those things. Now, some Christians would say you can have absolute certainty about the truth of the Christian God. Presuppositionalists will argue that way. They'll say that it's something that is just communicated to you directly by God. The problem is, for some people, the problem is that you have what's called as Descartes' evil demon. How do you know there's not an evil demon out there convincing you that all of that is true, and convincing you that you can be sure of that? So who really cares if you can have absolute certainty? What I can have is meaningful certainty. What everyone means in everyday language when they say that they're certain of something. I'm certain that my condominium exists right now where I live, even though I'm not there right now, and it's theoretically possible that a plane crashed into it and it was destroyed while I'm at work today, and just nobody called me. I'm reasonably certain that it exists, okay? And I'm also certain that God exists, but I don't have Cartesian. I don't care for that Cartesian certainty. I think that's a useless concept that he's implying here, because he even puts here absolute conviction. Okay, but am I certain? Yeah, I'm certain. Okay, I can claim to know that God exists. So, but I don't meet his meaning of certainty. So knock that one off. So I'm already not delusional, and I don't think most Christians are delusional in the way that he means it. Incorrigibility, not changeable by compelling counterarguments or proof to the contrary. If, people have said evidence is what convinces reasonable men, proof is what should convince even unreasonable men. Well, with this issue, if I was presented proof, now that would have to be some pretty solid evidence, some really strong proof. I mean, you would have to undo not only the theistic arguments that I think are beautiful and really powerful, you have to undo the resurrection case, all of the cumulative case elements that I think are there, and a good abductive approach to this issue. You have to undo all of that and show me that that's not good evidence for God. Then you'd have to show me that my personal experience that is accessible by me, but not necessarily accessible to you, like the prayer data that I had a while ago that I gave you. That you don't know that I'm telling you the truth, but it's accessible to me. So if you're going to convince me, though, you'd have to undo all of that and show me that it's better explained by I was confused about that, or something else was going on, neurons were firing wrong. I don't know. You'd have to somehow undo all of that, and that stuff is wrapped up inside of me really tightly. So, but if you undid all of that and gave me powerful evidence that amounts to proof, then yeah, I would have to no longer believe. And in past videos, I've given you my principles of falsification. You could falsify Christianity if Christianity were false. So it's not false, but if Christianity were false, you could perhaps show that it was false. And you could do that by perhaps showing something contradictory in the nature of God so defined by Christians. People try to do that with arguments from evil. You could try to do it by showing evidence that Jesus never rose from the dead. You could perhaps produce, if they exist, you could produce perhaps some documents written by disciples of Jesus that we had good reason to believe that were saying, these guys are running around saying Jesus rose from the dead, but it's all bunk. It didn't really happen. You could produce the bones of Jesus. I don't know. But these things would, if you could do them, they would falsify Christianity. They would show that it's false. I don't believe it's false. But could I be convinced if it was proven? It'd be really, really hard given my experience, the level of evidence I've seen. But yeah, if it's false, it could be proven to me that it's false. Impossibility, that's just the very thing that's under discussion. So that's to say that it's impossible is begging the question. So, yeah, I don't meet any of these. I'm not delusional. And I would almost guarantee you that the majority of the Christians who would be reading one of Richard Carrier's books are aware of who Richard Carrier is, would be influenced by Richard Carrier, or whatever, don't fall into these categories. At least one or more of them don't apply to them. So when we go back to, I think we said 10:18, let's see here, 10:18, something like that, and we look at these two claims, are they delusional? No. Now, again, you might say, well, he means by mildly delusional and majorly delusional. The majorly delusional people meet all three, and no, they don't, while the mildly delusional only meet one or two. But that's not what he said. He said for something to count as delusional, it has to hit all three. So I'm using his paradigm. And on his paradigm, these are not mildly delusional or majorly delusional. You know what we get instead from them? We get that on personal theism, Jesus was a great guy. Richard Carrier is mildly annoyed by that, and Jesus is truly the Son of God and whatnot. Richard Carrier is majorly annoyed by that. So what we have here is the scale for Richard Carrier's happy split between mildly annoyed with Christians and majorly annoyed with Christians, but you don't get delusional even if you go with Carrier's own criteria.
They have room to move. They'll waffle a little bit on the divine issues of Jesus and so forth. These kinds of happy-go-lucky Christians, I'm not going to be talking about today. I think that's kind of a mild delusion. It's kind of like somebody who thinks they can telepath.
All Christians are happy-go-lucky Christians. Well, that's probably not true, but they should be.
Communicate with their pets. It doesn't really hurt anyone. It's still a delusion, but I'm talking about that Jesus is truly the Son of God and whatnot, and that's what I mean by majorly delusional. Or at least I claim it's majorly delusional. Let's see if I'm right.
That's right. You claim that.
Now, what if someone came up to you and said that they have an imaginary friend named Zalmoxis,
this is good,
who they insist is really real? He's not imaginary, in fact. And they'll never die because this ancient demigod cleansed their soul with blood magic, which grants them the power of living forever in a magical place no one can see. Now you would immediately peg that as a delusion. It's bizarre, implausible, and patently untrue.
And now, well, let's let him finish talking about Zalmoxis before I give an analysis.
Zalmoxis cult, in fact, is attested in Herodotus, the historian, in 425 BC, 500 years before Christianity. Let me take you back to that. That's a description of an actual religion practiced 500 years before Christianity and possibly still being practiced in the time Christianity was invented. This looks very familiar, don't you think? Think about that. Another example I'm going to give you is the Heaven's Gate cult. I'm sure a lot of you know about this cult. They believed that a spaceship was behind Comet Hale-Bopp that was going to come and rescue them and transfer their souls from their current shells, their current bodies, into new special bodies in the spaceship, and they were going to fly away and live forever in this spaceship. And they were so convinced of this belief that several dozen of them committed suicide, mass suicide. They're actually, not all of them did, by the way. There actually are still Heaven's Gators around, and they still believe this thing. It could rise up as the new Scientology in 50 years. Who knows? But their belief, I have to point out, it was based on the idea of getting new bodies in an alien spaceship flying by. We regard this as patently absurd, implausible, and bizarre, but at least has all the elements of plausibility in the sense that spaceships are at least scientifically possible, and the idea of having your body or having the information in your brain re-imprinted on another body that's actually better built than your current one is not only plausible in the sense that it's physically possible, but we'll probably actually be able to do that within 1,000 years' time of technological development. So they're not really that far out on the fringe, and yet we all recognize this is a crazy idea.
Okay, now he may say more on this topic, but I don't want to get too far away. We've got two samples or so here of those Heaven's Gate folks and the Zalmoxis religion. Now, he says, look, we can all look at this and see that it's patently delusional and crazy. Okay, first off, notice that he has moved away from the first two principles of criteria and he's focusing primarily on the third one, which is impossibility. And he's modified the third one, he or whoever put that together, he's modified the third one such that he defines impossibility or falsity as it's implausible, it's bizarre, those sorts of things. Well, does that mean if it's implausible or bizarre, again, that does not mean that it's impossible. So he's put in there implausibility and bizarre to sort of allow for him to put things in the realm of impossibility that are not impossible, but they just sound strange to him. And then that in turn allows him to say about any particular religion or characterize Christianity in the most uncharitable terms and say, that sounds weird, right? Well, then it goes in our third criteria. When it doesn't go in your third criteria is it's impossible. So that's relevant. Now, what about Zalmoxis and Heaven's Gate and Scientology and these sorts of things? Well, can we all just tell that those things are clearly false? I don't think so. But I'm not being a narrow-minded thinker about this. Now, I'm not implying that Richard Carrier is in general a narrow-minded thinker. But in a group of people who laud themselves on being free thinkers, then you shouldn't just narrowly define things down to what is demonstrable in science or what sounds weird gets culled away, unless of course it has to do with quantum stuff. Then it's just okay for it to be weird. I'm sorry if I'm being snarky, but that's how I feel. So no, what would I do? I'd be more of a free thinker. I'd be more open-minded. I'd say to someone who's purporting the Zalmoxis religion, I'd say, all right, well, lay out the evidence. What's your evidence for this? What good reason do I have to believe this? If you'll give it to me, we can talk about it, right? Now, I didn't do that with Heaven's Gate, and I don't plan to. Although on Trinity Radio, if you go back to early 2018, I think we did it with Raelianism, which is a very small alien UFO cult. We did it with the Ordo Templi Orientis, which is very small. We did it with the David Koresh cult. We did it with a number of these weird cults. In fact, the episode's called Weird Cults. If you'll go look for it, you can hear our analysis of those things. So yeah, we actually do take them. We don't just brush them off. We say, okay, what do you got? Now, do I do that with every religion? I try to, but probably not every one. Something has to be relevant enough that I notice it or that it's kind of convincing some people before I start feeling like it needs a response. See, I believe, for reasons that I could articulate in another video, that if God exists, and I believe there's powerful arguments to believe that God exists, so much so that it blows my mind that people don't believe that God exists. But if you believe that God exists, then is it reasonable to think that he would try to interplay or communicate in some way with the persons that he created? Yeah, that's reasonable to believe. Can I prove it without a shadow of a doubt? No, but that seems reasonable to believe. Okay, well, if he did that, then where would I go to look for, if it's God and if he created mankind wanting to communicate with them, where would I look? Well, a good place to look might be the most dominant religions in the world. And so overwhelmingly, I've responded to the most dominant religions in the world when I've responded to other religious belief systems. However, when a belief system gets large enough that it gets adherents, even if, it sounds really weird, like Scientology, I'm still going to analyze it and take it seriously. I didn't take Scientology seriously for a long, long time, but whenever I saw that it was really getting a lot of traction in the culture, now fortunately it's dying and it's almost on the way out. They've kept up the illusion of being very influential and powerful because they have a lot of real estate, really expensive real estate around the world. But that said, it's dying out. But when it was really popular and influencing people, I had at least one conversation with a person who was a Scientologist, and I put together a study that was about 2 hours long on Scientology, going through it. Still have the PowerPoint. And I teach about Scientology in our cults class, where we look at cults here at Trinity Seminary. So I took it seriously, even though it was weird. So the answer to if you want to find the truth, you can't just say something's weird, so we're going to brush it off. Again, if we did that, we'd never know anything about the Higgs boson. We'd never know anything about quantum mechanics. We wouldn't discover a lot of the things that we discover. And but you don't just brush something off because it's weird. You say, okay, what's the evidence? I'm going to look at the evidence. That's how reasonable people should approach these things, but not with this narrow-minded. I mean, come on, be more free thinkers about these sorts of things. So that's how I would approach any of these religions. I wouldn't just brush it off. And secondly, they're only delusional if they meet his 3 criteria. And we've gotten away from that now. And he's just calling stuff delusional that sounds weird because he mixes it in, unfortunately and falsely, into that third category of impossible just because it sounds weird.
Now, compare this with what the Christians believe. They believe that they're going to get new bodies in a magical alternate universe.
Okay. Christians believe in a resurrected new heavens and new earth. We believe we're going to have resurrected physical bodies. Now, that may sound weird to some people, but again, don't brush things off because they sound weird. Brush them off because you've actually investigated them and you found that the evidence isn't compelling. That's the reason to disbelieve something, not because it sounds weird. I know I sound like a broken record. I'm sorry. But no, we do not believe in some alternate universe like that, and we don't believe in magic.
That's not as plausible. There's no science to support this. There are no magical alternate universes that we've...
Again, notice that we're just going to science. This happens with... I'm telling you, this has happened with, if not all, almost all of the atheists I've responded to in this series of response videos, is this whole business about if science doesn't tell us something, if the lab coat priesthood doesn't tell us something, we shouldn't believe it. And again, don't be so dogmatic. Don't be so narrow-minded. I thought that's what you thought the religious people did. Let's be more free thinkers. Let's actually analyze this thing openly and say, we're going to use all available ways to get to knowledge, whether that be philosophy, experience, history, the natural sciences. All these realms should be available to us, not just dogmatically hugging ourselves to science and believing what we're told.
Have any evidence of. So actually, it's either the same belief or at least less plausible even than what the Heaven's Gate people believed. And their whole theory, they actually had it worked out, is the idea of quantum teleportation and neural engineering, quantum teleportation of the information in their current...
Now, notice something here. We've just been talking about quantum stuff, and quantum stuff is among the weirdest stuff you will ever encounter, ever. And he's saying, now, even though it all sounds really weird, hey, at least it's more realistic because it's using our weird stuff. And by our, I mean science, because science is the property of atheists. But it's our weird stuff, so it makes it more reasonable, even though it's as weird as anything else. Now, I'm not slighting quantum mechanics. I find it fascinating, and I think it's a pioneer field, it's a frontier field, but we're finding out some really interesting things, and I'm fascinated by it, and I try to read up on it a lot. But I'm just saying, if you're talking about something's not credible just because it's weird, quantum stuff is really weird.
Current brains to neurally re-engineer the brains of their new bodies in the spaceship. Versus the Christian idea that God needs blood to fix the universe.
Okay, so this idea that God needs blood to fix the universe. The shedding of Jesus' blood is because it's a sacrifice. We're talking about the sacrifice that Jesus made. Okay, that's the thing that's relevant here. And God doesn't need anything to do anything. It's that God is a good God, and if God is a good God, He's going to be just. And so there had to be a just penalty for sin. Fortunately, He's also a God of love, and so He took that. I feel like I've said that already this video.
But only His own blood had enough magical power to do it, so He gave Himself a body and killed it.
Okay, this is a misunderstanding of the Trinity, mistaking the persons of the Trinity. Remember, the Trinity is one God who exists as three persons. So you have, now that's not a contradiction. One God who exists as three gods would be a contradiction. One person who exists as three persons would be a contradiction. But one God who exists as three persons may be mysterious. I mean, you may not have all the answers you would like when it comes to that, but it's not contradictory. And I used to have this problem when I was a kid. I used to think, wait a minute, Jesus praying to the Father, is that like just Jesus praying to Himself? No, these are separate persons of the Trinity, but they share one essence, God. Now, if you'd like a good analogy for that, the historic Christian analogy that has stood the test of time is a triangle. A triangle has three distinct points. Each point is not the other point. They're separate points. They're distinct from each other, but they share one, they're all part of one triangle, right? So you have three distinct points, one triangle. You have three persons and one God. So I don't think this is too problematic. I recently heard someone give a good analogy for this way to think about it. A thought experiment is, if you've ever seen the Back to the Future films, in Back to the Future 2, old Biff from the future, goes back and is sitting in a car having a conversation with young Biff about using a sports almanac to win a bunch of money. So you have two persons present that have their own distinct experience, but they share one essence, Biff, right? So we can actually see this happening. I mean, not that that is really going on, although guess what? People that affirm B theory of time have to believe that to a certain degree. So if you affirm B theory of time, there you go. But if you don't, at least it serves as a good thought experiment that you can have two persons and one essence. All right, have fun with that in the comments section. But the point is, he's messed up the Trinity here, messed up the persons of the Godhead. If you can't get Christian theology wrong, and your aim is to successfully mock Christian theology, you can mock it, but when you mock it either dishonestly or out of ignorance, the whole thing falls apart anyway. So your mockery didn't get very far.
Which one of these two religions makes more sense? So if the Zalmoxians and the Heaven's Gators were delusional, so are Christians. That's the point I'm trying to make here.
Now, wait a minute. That's the point you're trying to make, but you didn't make the point even with the Zalmoxians. You certainly didn't make it with Christians. And now just to say, because there was one religion that was weird, that we don't like, and you have another religion that you think is weird and you don't like, if one of them's false, the other one's false, I don't get it. That's like saying we got two bills here. One is a counterfeit bill. One is an actual $1 American currency bill. And they look very similar to the naked eye. In fact, they look almost identical and they feel the same and everything. But we find out this one is a counterfeit. Oh, well, then they're both counterfeits. Wait, what? Where's the logic in this? No, they're not both counterfeits. One of them's the real deal. You can't say just because this one turns out to be false, that one turns out to be false. Come on, Carrier. Let's get with the program.
Here. And so we've nailed one of the three requirements here: impossibility or falsity of content, implausible, bizarre, or...
You didn't nail it. What you did instead was you smuggled some things in under implausible that were just weird to you personally. But that doesn't mean they're impossible. You didn't show anything was impossible.
Patently untrue. Now, I won't leave it at that.
But notice, people on the internet take this sort of stuff on board, and I don't want you to be one of those. If you're an atheist, we have some really smart atheists that watch this channel, and I don't want you to be one of these people. I'm all for you putting together better arguments because I'm not self-conscious about Christianity. I think it's going to stand up against the best arguments, and I'd like to put it up against the best arguments instead of the worst arguments. But I think some people on the internet take something like this, and they say, see there, they may not even put it together as a flow of thought in their mind, but they're like saying, basically this is what they've said. Premise 1, if something is weird, it's impossible. Premise 2, Christianity is weird. Therefore, 3, Christianity is impossible. And it just doesn't follow. Impossibility is different from bizarre. Impossibility is different from implausible. And this is like really simple logic. But he's just shattered the backboard, dropped the mic, whatever you want to use, with this. I mean, it boggles the mind. And we're going to skip ahead now at this point to the outsider's test of faith. Okay, let's maybe he needs to set this up just a little bit.
Even if they have really solid evidence and their arguments are completely sound. So if you ever wonder why atheists have to be vilified constantly by Christians, they're poisoning the well. They're trying to tell people atheists are bad people, therefore their arguments...
Yeah, so there is some value in what he's saying here, although he's saying it only from the atheist perspective. He talks about how when you're afraid of things, when there's fear, you'll actually answer things more quickly and you'll trust a thing, whereas if you've just given more time, you might not, and things like that. Well, that's important, that's true, but that doesn't mean that fear is not sometimes valid. And so he says, well, religious people make people afraid that you're going to go to hell or whatever. Yeah, well, the same could be true in the other direction. There are fears that lead people to be atheists too. Fears that I may waste my life on something that's not true. Fears that I won't be considered smart. Fears that I won't be accepted in a particular group. There's all kinds of ways that this goes. Another thing that he mentioned, what was it he just said just then?
Or there's something wrong with them and they're a bad person.
Oh, yeah. He says that this is really interesting. He says, another thing that moves people and shouldn't, but it does, is if you think of someone as an untrustworthy person or an immoral person, a bad person, then you're less likely to believe them. And so that's why Christians are all the time talking about how immoral and awful atheists are, which is really strange because again, among the sorts of people who would interact with Richard Carrier's books, who are Christians, the kind of Christians he would deal with, Christian apologists, people like that, they're all the time pointing out that no, atheists can be moral and ethical people from a human perspective. That's not the point. It's that you can't account for your morality. On the other hand, I do run into a lot of atheists who are pointing out the wicked things that Christians do in the name of religion. So again, not only I'm not sure is that not quite as valid from your end, maybe it is in the general public. I'll grant you, okay? But it's definitely goes both ways, all right? So, but again, does that mean anything about what's delusional? No.
Then all their arguments can be ignored, even if they have really solid evidence and their arguments are completely sound. So if you ever wonder why atheists have to be vilified constantly by Christians, they're poisoning the well. They're trying to tell people atheists are...
And if you ever wonder why it is that Christians are vilified by atheists, they're poisoning the well.
Bad people, therefore their arguments have to be bad as well.
They're bad people, and so their arguments have to be ignored.
It's a fallacy. It's irrational. But it's psychologically innate. These are problems. Nevertheless, we have this outsider test for faith. We can prove that it's a rational way to go. You must test your own religious claims and texts by the same standards. So why don't they? The response that John Loftus has gotten, and he actually presented this argument at a conference of evangelical philosophers, and they all wrote responses, and his chapter in this book is a response to their responses. And basically, you can divide the responses into two things, two different ways of responding. And one is, we don't have to test our faith by the same standards we test others. Full stop. Hypocrisy rocks. That's one. That's patently irrational. So that's like delusion rearing its ugly head full on. I mean, you might as well just tattoo delusional right on your forehead if you're going to say that. Because that's the mantra of a delusional person. The second one is that our religion passes the outsider test because we have all this awesome evidence. And then, of course, that's what the rest of the book shows is not the case.
Oh, now notice, okay.
So why don't they?
Whoops. So first of all, did he address that? I mean, that was the salient point. The salient point was we have all this great evidence, and now Richard Carrier is going to show us that we don't have all this great evidence. No, that's what the rest of the book's about. Oh, okay, well, that's check mark on that, No, you need to actually show us that. Now, granted, this lecture is not about whether or not Christianity is true. However, it is about whether religious people, Christian people, are delusional. And part of making the case that we're delusional is that what we believe is impossible. Not just implausible, but impossible. He put impossibility. So if that's the case, then you, as a part of this case you're making, need to demonstrate that. But you don't. You offload that to John Loftus or whoever else wrote a book. I don't know. But let's look at this, the outsider test for faith. So the idea is here, you ought to look at other religious claims and texts and test them by the same standards, your own, by the same standards you apply to other religions. And if your religion's claims and texts are fare no better, then your religion is just as false as theirs is. Okay, now notice something here. First of all, in the second statement here is just false. And I'm judging this sentence by the same standards I judge all sentences, my own sentences. If your religion's claims text fare no better, then your religion is just as false as theirs. No, it means they're not as highly evidenced. All right. Now, I don't think I'm in this boat, but you can't just say because I'm not able to defend my position, because it doesn't pass my tests, my standards, whereas that one does. It may mean I have no reason to believe it, but it doesn't mean it's false. I mean, isn't this the very reason why atheists are always telling me that I'm not saying there is no God? I'm just saying I lack a belief in God, right? Isn't that what you're doing? Isn't that what you're saying? Well, this flies in the face of it. This is just, again, really just bad logic. But all right, let's look at the first statement. You must test your own religious claims and texts by the same standards you apply to other religions. And the kind of Christians that Richard Carrier interacts with academically and at these conferences or whatever, who are Christian apologists or at least interested in Christian apologetics, that's what they do. They test their own religious claims the same way they test others. Now, we all have biases, and we have to work to limit those biases. So we admit that. But we do try to apply those same tests. Did it ever cross your mind that perhaps the reason we're Christians is because, that we remain Christians, is because we did that and we found that Christianity is the most defensible explanation of the nature of reality? That's me. Now, you don't have to believe me. You can roll your eyes. You can say whatever you want. And I'm happy to admit I didn't initially become a Christian because of the evidence. However, I am still a Christian because I believe that Christianity is the most defensible worldview. So the rest of the book would show me why I'm wrong, but I didn't get the rest of the book, even though giving those answers would have been integral to his making the case that Christianity is a delusion. So, we're going to stop looking at him there, but I just think it's important to consider the logic that goes into a lecture like this. Demonstrably, this is not an opinion-based thing. This is not I'm confused or missing something. Demonstrably, Richard Carrier's own criteria for what makes something delusional shows that Christianity, in its milder or majorly annoying forms to him, are not delusions. They're mildly and majorly annoying to Richard Carrier, but they're not delusions. He didn't even demonstrate to me that Zalmoxism is a delusion. And we saw again this continued, that's weird, and Christianity strikes me as weird, therefore it's impossible to be true. The number 3 of his thing. And then we saw a bunch of offloading to other scholars that he didn't give here. So what we have in this lecture, and this is so emblematic. This is, again, we have some really smart skeptics that are on this channel. Thank you. But this is so emblematic of what we get so often on YouTube, which is just simply appealing to their own base, just getting the amens from the crowd, maybe selling a few books. And I'm not saying he's in it for the money, but just selling some books, getting the amens, doing the conference, then let's go out for drinks. That's what I got from this. But held up to actual scrutiny, doesn't fare very well. Well, listen, if you would like to take an insider test, if you'd like to know that Christianity is true, then I'd love to talk to you about that. You can email me at braxhunter, BRAXHUNTER, at yahoo.com, and I'd be happy to correspond with you there. And listen, the Bible says that you must repent. That means turn from your life without Jesus to a life with Jesus. Turn from your sin, not because you're a bad person, but because we've all done things that dishonor God, and Jesus died for that purpose, to forgive us of our sins. Romans 10:9, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved.